How hard do you have to work to become a billionaire? And I'm not talking about an inheritance situation. I'm talking about a self-made billionaire. You've got to grind. You've got to grind yourself to the bone. That's the only way, right? At least that is what we are told. But at least one mega billionaire would disagree. Andrew Carnegie founded one of the great corporations of all time, Carnegie Steel, which would go on to become US Steel, and he was, for a time, the richest man on the planet. He was so wealthy that he spent the last 20 years of his life trying his hardest to give away his fortune. He established a brand new elite university, Carnegie Mellon. He built more than 2,500 libraries and basically built the American public library system from scratch. He built Carnegie Music Hall. He revolutionized education. And yet, for all of this, not only did he not manage to give away all of his money, he didn't even manage to lower his net worth. His companies simply made money faster than he could give it away. So that is the type of billionaire we are talking about. So how hard do you have to work to become that? The answer is not hard at all. Here's a quote from one biographer. Quote, "Later in life, when Carnegie was called upon to advise young men on how to succeed in business, he never suggested that unceasing hard work was a prerequisite for acquiring wealth. He did not regard hard work as a virtue in itself." So what was his secret? If not unceasing hard work, how else do you become the richest man on the planet? So that is what we are going to be looking at today, the life of Andrew Carnegie and how to become a billionaire without even trying very hard.
I'm gonna show you how great I am.
This was our tiny fella.
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody.
Hello, and welcome to How to Take Over the World. This is Ben Wilson. I'm really excited for this episode. I found Andrew Carnegie totally fascinating. This is someone who retired at my age. He retired from full-time work at age 36 and then became the richest man in the world decades later. So this is a story of making great choices, making great connections, and doing the right thing at the right time. It's the ultimate work smarter, not harder story. And it's also a story of how to leave a legacy with the money you make. So I really enjoyed learning about Andrew Carnegie. My sources for this episode are Andrew Carnegie by David Nasaw. That's a good biography, but it is a beast. It's really long and very in-depth, maybe excessively so. If you want something that will just give you the hits and will be a quick in and out, then go for Andrew Carnegie's Autobiography, which is my other source for this episode. And you can find links to both of those in the show notes. If you purchase from Amazon using those links, you will be supporting the show. Without further ado, this is The Rise of Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was born on November 25th, 1835, and he was born in Dunfermline, which is an industrial town. It is the ancient capital of Scotland. So it's got this great big abbey. It had this big abbey, so it's sort of the religious center of Scotland for a long time. It's also the burial place of Robert the Bruce, this hero of Scottish independence. It has this kind of illustrious history as the heart of Scotland. It's also very close. It's basically now a suburb of Edinburgh. It's very close to Edinburgh. And so it's an industrial town with a lot of manufacturing, a lot of weaving, but it's also got this illustrious past. So it's a place where a young, poor weaver's boy might feel the pull to be something more. I mentioned Robert the Bruce, and Andrew Carnegie is actually particularly inspired by Robert the Bruce's contemporary, William Wallace. And William Wallace was an inspiration for Carnegie, who, yes, becomes a great businessman, but even more so saw himself as a liberal and a social innovator, someone who was like kind of a borderline socialist. Like he was kind of the ultimate capitalist, but he really believed in supporting the freedom and well-being of the working man. And he thought he was really standing up for the average working man. And he took a lot of inspiration from William Wallace, who he saw doing the same thing in a different way a few hundred years before. The Carnegie family are all weavers, and they had been for generations, for as long as anyone could remember. And like Andrew himself, they're radicals, all right? So most Scots in that area were Presbyterians, but they are not. They follow this guy, Swedenborg, who I happen to know something about. He's this interesting religious thinker. He's idiosyncratic in his Christian beliefs. He is very Christian. He believes in all these different miraculous things, but he's also somewhat progressive. in his beliefs as well. So they're Swedenborgians, is what they were called. So these kind of unorthodox, liberal, radical thinkers. Carnegie gets no more than 2 years of formal schooling. He has to start work quite young. Again, he doesn't come from a wealthy family. However, in that brief period of schooling, he does really well in school. He has this exceptional memory, just iron trap mind, remembers anything that he sees or hears. And he gets teased a little bit as a teacher's pet. That's how good he is and how much he thrives at school. The Carnegie family is wiped out by a recession, the Panic of 1837, which destroys the luxury market for textiles, which is what the Carnegies were in. All right, they weren't just your normal sort of factory line workers. They did their own textile manufacturing, and that was a little more handcrafted. And so they did that themselves. And so when the luxury market is wiped out in 1837, it just completely destroys Andrew Carnegie's father's ability to work. By the way, Andrew was known as Andra, which I guess is a pretty common Scottish nickname for people named Andrew. So Andrew Carnegie is how he was known early in life. So with his father basically losing his ability to work, Andrew's mother becomes the breadwinner as she's a petty entrepreneur. She starts selling treats and baked goods. She actually does quite well, though. Frankly, Carnegie probably gets most of his entrepreneurial spirit and his sort of knack for making money from his mother, not from his father. However, more and more things kind of come and conspire to just really wipe out the textile industry in Dunfermline. The power loom comes along, which starts to wipe out the individual entrepreneurs. And then also, the Americans institute a tariff. And a lot of the textiles that they were making were being exported to the United States. And so when an American tariff hits the textile industry, basically everyone starts failing in Dunfermline, that there's no more business. It really wipes out the entire industry. And what that means is that all these workers no longer have the money to buy Carnegie's mother's treats and baked goods. And so even that source of income fails. However, this is at a time when many, many people in Scotland are emigrating to the United States. And some of the Carnegie's extended family has already done that. And so they decide, okay, we've got no future here. We have no way of making money. Let's set sail. They're actually so poor at this point that they have to borrow money from a family friend, but they do. And they borrow this money and emigrate to America. And their extended family welcomes them there. So this happens when Andrew Carnegie is 13 years old. So once they get to America, once again, this is the mid-19th century. We're now in the late 1840s. So there are no child labor laws. And there's no real reason for Andrew to go to school. And so he just starts working immediately. So he starts work as a bobbin boy, which is a job working in textile factories. The women mostly were the ones who were actually working with the patterns and doing the fabrics. As the bobbin boy, you are working on fixing the machines when issues come up. And then you're also running these bobbins, which are these spools, back and forth to the women who are doing the weaving. It's kind of a good first job, kind of. It's actually infamous, this job, these bobbin boys, because they would have to go in and fix the machinery. And then often when they would, it would start working again, and then they would lose a finger. It was very dangerous. You get hurt all the time. And so Carnegie does this for less than a year. The whole time he's thinking, man, I can see this is dangerous. This is going to wear me out. I need to kind of get out of this job. He is unusually prompt and reliable as a bobbin boy, which opens up opportunities for him to move beyond it. And he gets a job as a messenger boy. He is referred by his uncle. And listen to Carnegie's description of the interview for this job as a messenger boy, which he writes in his autobiography. He says, quote, "The interview was successful. I took care to explain that I did not know Pittsburgh, that perhaps I would not be strong enough, but all I wanted was a trial. He asked me how soon I could come, and I said that I could stay now if wanted. And looking back over the circumstance, I think that answer might well be pondered by young men. It is a great mistake not to seize the opportunity. The position was offered to me. Something might occur. Some other boy might be sent for. Having got myself in, I proposed to stay there if I could. Mr. Brooks very kindly called the other boy, for it was an additional messenger that was wanted, and asked him to show me about, and let me go with him and learn the business. I soon found opportunity to run down the corner of the street and tell my father that it was all right, and to go home and tell mother that I had got the situation." Okay, so his father has taken him to this interview and is literally waiting outside. And I think the normal person would say, well, let me go tell my father that everything's okay and that I got the position. Let me just settle some things and then I'll start. maybe tomorrow, maybe this afternoon. But Carnegie is so anxious to get his hands on this opportunity. He says, no, I'll start right now. And so he starts working. And then as soon as he finds a spare moment, he goes in, and then he tells his father that he got the position and what's going on, and you can go home and it's okay. So it's a minor inconvenience, but I think it just goes to show the reason that he was successful. And you might say, oh, he got all these amazing opportunities. It's like, well, no, but he did anything that he could to take the most advantage of these opportunities when they came to him, including starting right then, right at that moment. And I think that's the difference between someone like Carnegie, who has so much success, and other people. There's some other principles as well. I think it's so interesting that he admits his faults in the interview. He says, maybe I don't know Pittsburgh well enough, and maybe I'm not strong enough. And that comes across as extremely honest, all right? But it also gives him credibility when he says his strengths. And so I think that's a clever interviewing strategy. He also asks for a chance to prove himself, make it a no-risk proposition for the person hiring you. And then, of course, the initiative, the audacity to start right away. Don't leave anything for chance. So he starts as a messenger boy. Here's what David Nasaw writes about that. He says, it was not easy being a messenger boy in Pittsburgh or in any city whose streets did not cross at right angles in a New York City style grid. Andy's greatest fear was that he would not be able to find the offices he was supposed to deliver messages to. Quote, so I started in and learned all the addresses by heart, up one side of Wood Street and down the other. Then I learned the other business streets in the same way. After memorizing the street map, he learned the names and faces of the city's businessmen so that should he manage to meet one in the street, he could say hello, and in those rare but magical moments when he had a telegram, deliver it on the spot. Okay, so he's very capable as a messenger boy, right? He's teaching himself all the streets by memorization so that he always knows exactly where to go. He teaches himself the names and faces of all the businessmen so that he can deliver it to him on the spot if he ever has the opportunity. So he's just really preparing to do things well. He's also educating himself outside of his job. So he teaches himself Morse code, and then subsequently, because of that, because he has a skill, he's hired as a telegraph operator. Not only that, but he makes extra money as a telegraph operator. Why? Because he is the receiver of what they call the steamer news. Okay, so the steamer news is the news just coming off the steamer in other words, a steamship in Canada. And so it's all news, right? Like news. And that makes it very valuable. It goes into all the newspapers. People really want to hear it. And why is he, this really young man, hired to take down the most important telegraph messages, the steamer news, in this telegraph office? Well, it's because it's long. It's, you're receiving all this news. It's not just like a short message that people tend to send. It's a long, uninterrupted message of news. The problem is you get all these electrical storms, which cause the message to not go through. So you get all these slight interruptions, right? You can think of it as like you're answering a telephone, but there's all this static and the signal comes in and out. And so most operators would ask the sender to start over when something got garbled. So they'd take it out of a sentence, and then in the second sentence, it'd get interrupted by the static, and so they'd say, start over. But because Carnegie was so informed, right? This is someone who loved learning. And so he read the newspapers. He stayed up on news and world events. He read Shakespeare in his spare time. Like he just knew lots of random little stuff. He just knew a lot about everything. And so he was good at filling in the gaps. And so instead of having to ask people to start over, he would just say, okay, the guy said new queen crowned at and then it cuts out. But since I know that the queen is usually crowned at Buckingham Palace, I can fill in Buckingham Palace, right? And so I don't have to ask him to start over, so I can take down the news more accurately and faster than other people can. So that is really reliant on his knowledge that he has from just generally staying informed on things that don't have immediate application to his job at the moment, but they do end up having application to his job because he just likes to be educated and to stay informed. Okay, one of these things that he's doing to stay informed starts an amateur debating society with his friends where they debate actual live issues. And so it's an opportunity to improve and refine his public speaking ability, as well as to stay informed and educated and refine his thoughts about some of these issues. I think there is a self-improvement angle, obviously, but I think he also just enjoys it. He enjoys talking about these things. He enjoys thinking about them and meeting with other people and doing the same. Here's what David Nasaw writes about it. He says, though he and the friends of this inner circle, a group of like-minded immigrant boys about his age and like him, smart, ambitious, and inexhaustible, all worked 5 days a week and a half day on Saturday, they had organized themselves into a quasi-formal debating society that met in Henry Phipps' cobbler shop. Phipps's older son, John, was a charter member of the group. His younger boy, Harry, hung around at the edges. The senior member, Thomas Miller, got to sit on the leather seat of old man Phipps' cobbling bench. The boys organized debates on religion and politics, teased one another about their best girls, went skating on the Allegheny River, and visited Colonel Anderson's library. Okay, so again, there is an element of fun in they're teasing each other about girls, they're going skating together, they're visiting the library, but they're also debating and refining themselves and improving themselves and each other. Here's what Carnegie writes in his autobiography about this club. He says, I know of no better mode of benefiting a man than joining such a club as this. Much of my reading became such as had a bearing on forthcoming debates, and that gave clearness and fixity to my ideas. The self-possession I afterwards came to have before an audience may very safely be attributed to the experiences of the Webster Society. Right, that's what they call it, the Webster Society. And then he goes on, this is sort of out of order, but this is just good advice. He writes, my 2 rules for speaking then and now were make yourself perfectly at home before your audience and simply talk to them, not at them. Do not try to be somebody else. Be your own self and talk, never orate until you can't help it. All right, I think that's a very compelling idea. 2 pieces of advice. And so much of public speaking comes down to this. And you see this all the time if you see great public speakers. Number 1, make yourself at home, make yourself comfortable. And then 2, talk to people, not at them. That's actually surprisingly difficult to do. It's just so easy to get up in front of people and go into, hello, my name is Ben Wilson. Kind of go into radio mode or you start talking in some weird way. But if you can sound like you're just talking to someone, like it's perfectly conversational, that is what all great speakers do. And by the way, while we're here, if you are interested in something like this, in a society like the Webster Society, a self-improvement type of society, please consider joining the Classical Society. This is something that I started with my associate, Alex Petkus. If you listen to How to Take Over the World, if you are interested in greatness, in excellence, in the virtues that are demonstrated by the people we talk about on this podcast, and you are someone who is successful in your field, then the Classical Society is for you. It is a business association. I sometimes jokingly describe it as YPO for people who like ancient Greece and Rome. But we have a debate and public speaking forum called Rostra. We have study groups for those who want to learn more about history. We have in-person events quarterly. It's still new. We started this just a couple of months ago, but we already have 35 members and we are now starting to really grow fast. It's already great and it's only getting better. I really think this is an organization that has the potential to change the world. So if you want to be like Benjamin Franklin or Andrew Carnegie or Steve Jobs and join a group of like-minded people who are interested in improving each other and themselves and changing the world together, then go to theclassicalsociety.com and submit an inquiry to learn more. I'm going to leave that in the premium edition. That wasn't really an ad. That is kind of an ad, but because it does cost some money. But I really hope you guys will think about it. I'm really excited about where this is going. Okay, so Carnegie is employed as a telegraph operator when he gets a new opportunity, reading now from his autobiography. Quote, after my return to Pittsburgh, it was not long before I made the acquaintance of an extraordinary man, Thomas A. Scott, one to whom the term genius in his department may safely be applied. He had come to Pittsburgh as superintendent of that division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Frequent telegraphic communication was necessary between him and his superior, Mr. Lombard, general superintendent at Altoona. This brought him to the telegraph office at nights, and upon several occasions, I happened to be the operator. One day, I was surprised by one of his assistants, with whom I was acquainted, telling me that Mr. Scott had asked him whether he thought that I could be obtained as his clerk and telegraph operator, to which this young man told me that he had replied, that is impossible. He is now an operator. But when I heard this, I at once said, not so fast, he can have me. I want to get out of a mere office life. Please go and tell him so. The result was I was engaged February 1st, 1853 at a salary of $35 a month as Mr. Scott's clerk and operator. A raise in wages from $25 to $35 per month was the greatest I had ever known. Actually, David Nasaw makes the point that though it is an increase from $25 to $35 per month, he has to give up like an extra bonus that he gets for transcribing the Steamer News. And so actually, He says it's the greatest pay raise he's ever known. It's actually a pay cut to go work for Mr. Scott. He kind of simplifies it for his autobiography, but he is taking a pay cut. And why is he doing this? Taking a pay cut in order to go work for Mr. Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Well, he's more than just receiving messages for Scott. He's basically his chief of staff. He's secretary, chief assistant, even takes over management when Scott is gone sometimes. And so he's taking it because it's an opportunity, number one, to work for someone that he really respects and that he thinks is going places. And then number two, an opportunity to do more, to learn new skills and to learn the railroad business. And that is huge in Pennsylvania. That is the big business at the time. And he gets, like I said, opportunities to learn new things. Here is how Carnegie vividly describes one such opportunity in his autobiography. By the way, I know I'm reading a lot from his autobiography, but it's just so vivid and well written. So indulge me one more time as I read this story. All right. Here's how Carnegie describes it. Quote, "The railway was a single line. Telegraph orders to trains often became necessary, although it was not then a regular practice to run trains by telegraph. No one but the superintendent himself was permitted to give a train order on any part of the Pennsylvania system, or indeed of any other system, I believe at that time. It was then a dangerous expedient to give telegraph orders, for the whole system of railway management was still in its infancy, and men had not yet been trained for it. It was necessary for Mr. Scott to go out night after night to breakdowns or wrecks to superintend the clearing of the line. He was necessarily absent from the office on many mornings." Okay, let me just summarize there. So you only have one railway. You don't have two going side by side. And so you need to know at all times where the other trains are, because if you don't, then maybe you're going down the single railway and another train is going the opposite direction. You're going to collide into one another, right? Which is a huge problem. So whenever there is a collision or a derailing, then the superintendent himself needs to go out and inspect everything. And he's got to keep track of all the charts and what train is going where and who do we need to inform by telegraph that they can't go at this time because there's a train still on the tracks. Okay. So the superintendent is super key to all of this. He needs to know where everything is, and everything has to rely on him because there are all these moving parts. And if you get them wrong, then trains are going to collide. Again, there's only one railway. So that's the background. He says, "One morning I reached the office and found that a serious accident on the Eastern Division had delayed the express passenger train westward, and that the passenger train eastward was proceeding with a flagman in advance at every curve. The freight trains in both directions were all standing still upon the sidings. Mr. Scott was not yet to be found." Okay, so everything is at a standstill because of this one wreck, and they can't find Mr. Scott. And so everything just has to wait for him until he can sort everything out. He says, "Finally, I could not resist the temptation to plunge in, take the responsibility, give train orders, and set matters going. I knew it was dismissal, disgrace, perhaps criminal punishment for me if I erred. On the other hand, I could bring in the wearied freight train men who had lain out all night. I could set everything in motion. I knew I could. I had often done it in wiring Mr. Scott's orders. I knew just what to do, and so I began. I gave the orders in his name, started every train, sat at the instrument watching every tick, carried the trains along from station to station, took extra precautions, and had everything running smoothly when Mr. Scott at last reached the office. He had heard of the delays. His first words were, 'Well, how are matters?' He came to my side quickly, grasped his pencil, and began to write his orders. I had then to speak and timidly said, 'Mr. Scott, I could not find you anywhere, and I gave these orders in your name early this morning. Are they going all right? Where is the Eastern Express?' I showed him the messages and gave him the position of every train on the line, freights, ballast trains, everything. Showed him the answers of the various conductors, the latest reports at the stations where the various trains had passed. All was right. He looked at my face for a second. I scarcely dared look in his. I did not know what was going to happen. He did not say one word, but again looked carefully over all that had taken place. Still he said nothing. After a little, he moved away from my desk to his own, and that was the end of it. He was afraid to approve what I had done, yet he had not censured me. If it came out all right, it was all right. If it came out all wrong, the responsibility was mine. So it stood. But I noticed that he came in very regularly in good time for some mornings after that. In other words, everything goes okay, and so he lets it stand, but for some time after that, he's coming in first thing in the morning to make sure this doesn't happen again and that young Andrew Carnegie is not giving out the orders. Okay, back to his writing. Of course, I never spoke to anyone about it. None of the train men knew that Mr. Scott had not personally given the orders. I had almost made up my mind that if the like occurred again, I would not repeat my proceeding of that morning unless I was authorized to do so. I was feeling rather distressed about what I had done until I heard from Mr. Franciscus, who was then in charge of the freighting department at Pittsburgh, that Mr. Scott, the evening after the memorable morning, had said to him, and here's what Mr. Scott told Franciscus. He says, "Do you know what that little white-haired Scotch devil of mine did? No. I'm blamed if he didn't run every train of the division in my name without the slightest authority." "And did he do all right?" asked Franciscus. "Oh yes, all right." This satisfied me. Of course, I had my cue for the next occasion and went boldly in. From that date, it was very seldom that Mr. Scott gave a train order. Okay, amazing. So this breakdown happens. Carnegie goes boldly in, gives all the orders, and it all goes perfectly. And why? Because this whole time that he has been telegraphing the orders from Mr. Scott, he's been paying attention. He hasn't just been a zombie saying, I'll let Mr. Scott do all the thinking. I will just think about sending the orders. No, he's been observing. What are these orders? How does he manage the operations? He's been learning it. And so when there's an opportunity, when Mr. Scott isn't there, he has the intelligence and the ability to give all these orders exactly how Mr. Scott would do it if he was there. And he does it. He dives right in. As Napoleon says, audacity, audacity, always audacity. And this is a great example of that. Here is the principle that Carnegie says he learned from the experience. In his autobiography, he writes, "The battle of life is already half won by the young man who is brought personally in contact with high officials. And the great aim of every boy should be to do something beyond the sphere of his duties, something which attracts the attention of those over him." Speaking of which, at this time, he's also taken the initiative to start writing anonymous letters to the editor of various newspapers to support his boss, Tom Scott. He criticizes some business leaders to help get a train terminal built in Pittsburgh, or maybe it's Philadelphia, or maybe it's both. I can't remember the exact details, but he's trying to help get this terminal built. And these business leaders, they don't want to subsidize it. And so he writes these letters to the editor to help get this thing done. So that's something completely unnecessary. He's writing it anonymously. It's honestly probably not even to come back to him as a form of recognition. But he just wants a chance to improve his writing skills. And legitimately, he views that as the Pennsylvania Railroad continues to improve and do better, he's now a part of it. He's in so well with the executives that he really views his fate as intertwined with the fate of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which is remarkable for someone who is still not yet 20, right? He's really young. So this is the situation he's in. He's still a secretary. But his stock is growing so much that he can really be considered a minor executive, even though he's really just Tom Scott's secretary. You see this sometimes with people in smaller roles who manage to grow their actual footprint in the company far beyond what their actual title is. And that's the situation he's in. You can see this change in an opportunity that Scott gives him. He actually gives him the opportunity to invest in one of his new ventures. So Tom Scott comes to Andrew Carnegie and he says, "Hey, we're starting this new venture called the Adams Express. Do you want to invest $500? And Carnegie says, "Of course, I'm in, count me in." The only problem is he doesn't have $500. He's been doing really well in terms of rising up the ladder, but he is still young and very junior. He's still technically a secretary. And his influence is really big with the Pennsylvania Railroad, but it has not paid off in a lot of money yet. He's not someone flush with cash. He doesn't have $500. He probably doesn't have $50. And so Carnegie and his mother literally mortgaged the house in order to come up with the $500 to invest in the Adams Express. Okay. So why is this so important to Carnegie that he's willing to mortgage the house? Well, for one thing, it's an opportunity to become capitalist, an owner of capital, to have skin in the game. He's no longer just a worker, he's an owner. And he recognizes how important that transition is. The other thing it does is further develop his relationship with Tom Scott, to maybe come closer to being peers in the relationship and to get his start as a capitalist. And once he becomes a capitalist, he is absolutely obsessed. This idea that he does nothing and just gets checks in the mail for being an owner is an absolute revelation to him. He is immediately addicted. From the Nasaw biography, quote, Andy's reaction to getting his first dividend check, as recorded in his autobiography and elsewhere, was euphoric. Quote, I shall remember that check as long as I live. It gave me the first penny of revenue from capital, something that I had not worked for with sweat of my brow. Eureka, I cried. Here's the goose that lays the golden egg. Before cashing the check, he showed it to his friends at their Sunday afternoon gathering. The effect produced was overwhelming. None of them had imagined such an investment possibility. They were all amazed, he would later write, by the magical properties of investment capital. How money could make money. How, without any attention from me, this mysterious golden visitor should come led to much speculation upon the part of the young fellows, and I was, for the first time, hailed as a capitalist. Okay, so this might seem basic to us, but yes, capital is very powerful, and the faster you can go from your time and work making you money to your money making you money, the better. And Carnegie learns this lesson very, very young. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you have heard me advertise Founders. Well, now the host of Founders, David Senra, has a new show where he interviews some of the greatest living founders. And I mean the greats. He's got long-form conversations with people like Daniel Ek of Spotify, Michael Dell, and Michael Ovitz of CAA. They are very in-depth conversations that really strike at the heart of what motivates them, how they think, and what actions they have taken to become the greats in their industries. I really love it. It's another great podcast from David Senra. So check it out. That podcast is called simply David Senra, and you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is brought to you by Zashi Wallet, where you can buy and store Zcash. Encryption is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. If Andrew Carnegie could see our age, he would be absolutely shocked by the lack of privacy, especially in financial matters. This is someone, Carnegie, who was conducting his business in private, out of the public eye all the time. That was one of the secrets of his success, was his ability to make backroom deals. Encryption preserves your privacy and your anonymity and helps return to you the sense of freedom that past generations experienced. And Zcash is encrypted Bitcoin, digital cash that protects your agency and safety by encrypting your wealth. And that is something I really believe in. The idea that everyone, including governments and banks, would know what I am doing whenever I make a purchase is just horrible to me. So consider Zcash. You can buy, store, and spend Zcash using the Zashi Wallet, and you can find it in the App Store or Google Play Store. So give it a try. Again, that is Zashi, Z-A-S-H-I Wallet, and you can get it wherever you get your apps. Okay, so the Adams Express is a good illustration of how a lot of this works at the time. Because the Adams Express is a delivery service, like Wells Fargo or American Express. At the time, obviously both those organizations now do very different things, but those were what both of those did. Express delivery of parcels, packages, and messages, okay? So the Adams Express comes to some executives from the Pennsylvania Railroad, including Scott, and they say, hey, how about you join us as investors, part owners of the Adams Express, and in exchange, you give us an exclusive contract to be the only express carrier on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Okay. Nowadays, that would be called corrupt. It would be called anti-competitive. It would not be legal. Although, there's some sort of similar arrangements, but you actually just have to have the Pennsylvania Railroad invest instead of the executives, right? That's what you'd have to do. So now, yes, it would be illegal. But again, this would be a pretty common arrangement throughout Carnegie's career. Okay, so that is how something like the Adams Express works, and that is how he is getting 28% returns on his $500 invested in the Adams Express, which is extraordinary, right? Let's review where we're at. Carnegie comes over at age 13. For a year, until he's 14, he's working as a bobbin boy, working in the factories, running these bobbins back and forth, fixing the machinery, small stuff like that. Okay. Then he is employed as a messenger for a couple of years, running messages all over towns to different business people for like a courier service. Okay. So he's running messages for railroad executives, iron executives, everyone, right? He's doing that. And then he gets hired as a telegraph operator, where he does quite well and takes the steamer news. And so is making money as a telegraph operator. Then he gets hired as the personal telegraph operator, the personal messenger of Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And then there's this subtle shift where that's actually still, years later, that's still his position. He is the personal assistant of Tom Scott. But over time, he's essentially become his lieutenant, his number two. He's actually running the railroad in his absence, making managerial decisions. So the position has not caught up with what he's actually doing. Okay. So he's doing well, but on the other hand, like he's so well regarded within the company that he is brought in as a co-investor in the Adams Express with all of these other executives. All right. So he's at this very weird point in his career. He does get one slight promotion at 22 years old. Carnegie moves to Altoona with Scott, where he gets a position there. And now it is recognized that he is a junior executive. It's a small town, Altoona, but it's an important railroad station, 75 miles east of Pittsburgh. And it's a hub. So you would think Pittsburgh would be the hub, but just because of the way the tracks are laid, Altoona, even though it's a smaller town than Pittsburgh, is the major railroad center in Western Pennsylvania. So as Tom Scott's career advances, so does Carnegie's. You know, Tom Scott had evaluated this kid and thought, okay, I want him to be my protege. Yeah, I think this kid is going places. I think he can help me. But Carnegie has also been evaluating this older man and thought, yeah, this is someone I want to hitch my wagon to. So he's relying on Scott to advance him, but he's also improving himself so that he'll be ready for those opportunities. Nasaw writes, while working for Tom Scott, Andy Carnegie continued with his self-education. He had neither the money nor the time to attend school. Instead, he read as much as he could, wrote letters, position papers, and articles for the Swedenborgian journals, and sought out situations in which he could sharpen his writing and debating skills. It was an article of faith for him and his friends that learning to read, write, and argue would make them better citizens, men, and earners. Okay. Now that he's no longer in Pittsburgh, he's off in this town of Altoona. He isn't able to meet in the Webster Society anymore. So this becomes more private. You know, he's got to learn and educate himself. He's doing all this reading and writing. He also teaches himself practical skills, teaches himself accounting. Beyond the Adams Express, Carnegie is not only participating in some of these deals, but he's also originating them. So he makes a really important contact with a man named T.T. Woodruff, who has invented this sleeper car. And Carnegie helps bring the sleeper car onto the Pennsylvania Railroad, for which Woodruff gives him some equity in his sleeper car company. He would later merge his company with a man named Pullman, and it becomes the Pullman-Woodruff Sleeper Car Company, which you've probably heard of the Pullman Company if you're American or if you know American history. This is like one of the important railway car companies of the 19th century. So it's a very, very successful company, and Carnegie becomes an early investor and owner of it by making this contact with T.T. Woodruff. So Carnegie has learned the strategy from the Adams Express and is now using it himself. He would later spin up a story about how he just ran into Woodruff on the street and heard his story and thought, wow, you know, this is an amazing invention. But it turns out that it was like a little more complicated than that. Woodruff was actually already a very successful inventor, and probably Carnegie actually sought him out. So this kind of fictionalization, this history making reminds me of Coco Chanel. You know, let's say neither of them are lying. Let's say that they are creating their own past, creating their own reality about how they came up and how they found success. And it's a much more cinematic, shall we say, version of reality. Okay, well, finally, Tom Scott gets promoted to vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And Carnegie is actually really bummed by that, because that means that Tom Scott is actually going to have to go to Philadelphia to the corporate headquarters. And so, you know, Carnegie is going to have to work under someone else now. Except actually he won't, because shockingly, only 6 days after his 24th birthday, Carnegie is made the superintendent of the Western Pennsylvania Railroad, taking Tom Scott's place. All right, this is someone who is like 20, 30 years his senior. Okay, so this is a huge promotion and a huge honor for Carnegie at such a young age. It shows enormous trust from the higher ups at the Pennsylvania Railroad. I mean, there's like just a year or two where he's a junior executive, but this guy basically skips from private secretary to Western superintendent. Yeah, this is basically the equivalent in modern terms of someone going from a personal assistant to a vice president with like 1 year in between. Okay, it's this unbelievably fast rise through the company. Despite this unbelievably fast rise, he doesn't doubt himself. He's not worried about his ability to do the actual work. Nasaw writes, not least among his attributes was his total confidence in his ability to get the job done. Quote, I was at an age when I thought I could manage anything. And that is something that we will see over and over from Carnegie, just this unlimited belief in himself, this unbelievable confidence. All right. And that is essential. You see this in a lot of other great leaders as well. You can't lead without confidence, because if you don't believe in yourself, then how are you going to ask other people to follow you, right? So confidence is essential. And that is something that Carnegie has in spades. All right. So it's a really fast transformation. Again, like in Pittsburgh, the superintendent of the Western Railroad is a really big deal. You might have noticed that actually Tom Scott was in Altoona as the superintendent of the Pittsburgh Railroad, and so will Carnegie be. But when you're making that much money, when you're the superintendent, 75 miles away, you can afford to keep a home in Pittsburgh and then also kind of do your work in Altoona, which is what he does. So Carnegie has to very quickly adjust to becoming one of the prominent men of Pittsburgh. So he starts taking etiquette lessons to become a member of society, of the upper crust, which I think demonstrates where his priorities really are, right? This is not someone who wants money for the sake of it. He wants to be a member of society. He wants to be known. He wants to be viewed. He wants to be a gentleman. He's someone who still identifies with his working class past, but he does really have this aspiration to be seen as more than that. In this position, he briefly has to manage the working men, right? The railroad workers, the construction workers, the engineers, like all these sort of blue collar workers. But he actually fires himself from this job, and he does so relatively quickly. Here's why, reading now from the Nasaw biography, quote, "He drove the men who worked for him relentlessly, day and night, to clear tracks of wrecks, to repair broken rails, to keep the road in proper repair. If he could survive with little or no sleep over long stretches, so should they. Quote, I was probably the most inconsiderate superintendent that ever was entrusted with the management of a great property. For, never knowing fatigue myself, I overworked the men and was not careful enough in considering the limits of human endurance." There is the slightest hint of regret coupled with resignation here. Carnegie did not enjoy directly supervising his working men. He was, he recognized, too impatient, too lacking in sympathy to establish any sort of rapport with the men who worked for him. This was not a moral failing, but an operational one. To work men to the ultimate, one had to understand their limits. Carnegie didn't, and hence got less out of them than he should have. I love that. That is a great quote. To work men to the ultimate, one has to understand their limits. And I think this is a great lesson. You need to recognize those things that you are just not cut out for and fire yourself from them as quickly as possible. So that's what Carnegie does. As superintendent, he says, look, I know I'm the superintendent, but I am no longer going to directly oversee the working men. I can't do this. The day after Carnegie was appointed as the superintendent, John Brown was hanged for murder. All right, so John Brown is this radical liberal who is a radical abolitionist. And he had tried to incite a slave revolt in Virginia, what is now West Virginia, by taking over an armory and senselessly murdering a few people, including one free black man. It's incredibly botched. John Brown is not a good person. Sometimes you hear people praise him. They need to look at the details, okay? Yes, he's a radical abolitionist, but he really did a lot to incite the Civil War, okay? Because he murders these people for no good reason. He's trying to start a slave revolt, which never gets off the ground, and he just senselessly kills these people. And some Northern abolitionists start to say, okay, well, we hate slavery, and this guy tried to end it by starting a slave revolt, so yay for him. And the Southerners look at this and they say, well, you're cheering on this guy who just murdered some well-to-do citizens, many of whom were not slave owners, and it creates this really bad blood and it starts spiraling. And again, this is one of the events that starts off the chain of events that culminates in the American Civil War. And so this is the environment in which Carnegie becomes the superintendent of the Western Pennsylvania Railroad. As soon as the war breaks out, the Pennsylvania Railroad in general, and Carnegie in particular, do everything they can to facilitate the movement of men and material to the theater of war. This is out of patriotic duty, and also, again, remember, Carnegie is a very committed liberal of the time. He really sympathizes with the working man, with liberal reforms, and with anti-slavery as a movement, and abolition as a movement, which are subtly different things. Anyways, so one of the original areas of conflict for the American Civil War is in Northern Virginia, right around Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. And the Confederacy had destroyed telegraph lines and railroads leading into Washington, D.C. in order to cut off the capital from Northern support. So Carnegie volunteers and goes to Maryland, where he personally helps to reconstruct the rail and telegraph lines. In his autobiography, Carnegie talks about how he gained a war scar when a loose telegraph wire whips him in the face and gives him a nasty cut on the cheek. Biographer David Nasaw takes this at face value and basically calls Carnegie a self-promoting blowhard. Like, this guy is really comparing himself to injured soldiers who have like arms and legs blown off and bullet hole wounds. But I think that at least on some level, Carnegie is writing this with a wink. I think he's got to be at least somewhat self-aware and joking, poking fun at himself. Although I do think he really wanted people to know that he did serve his country and work hard and incur at least some risk in the war. Here's what he writes. Okay, you can decide whether you think that he is saying this with a wink and a nod, or whether he is just genuinely not self-aware and comparing himself to veterans. He says, "I received a gash in my cheek, which bled profusely. In this condition, I entered the city of Washington with the first troops, so that with the exception of 1 or 2 soldiers wounded a few days previous and passing through the streets of Baltimore, I can justly claim that I shed my blood for my country among the first of its defenders. I gloried in being useful to the land that had done so much for me." All right. This is complicated by the fact that these facts don't even stand up to scrutiny. It appears that Carnegie was actually back in Pittsburgh for this, and that these repairs were completed by Army soldiers. He did definitely later go to the theater, and so maybe he's just mixing up the timeline a little bit. It could be that he was genuinely confused, or it could be one other instance of him kind of creating a fictional history for himself. Who knows? He was very good at that anyway. So while there, things that we do know that he actually did is he sets up a bridge across the Potomac, or helps to set up a bridge across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. to Alexandria, which is the city just on the other side of the river in Northern Virginia. And so the troops go across this bridge, they go into Virginia, the North, the Union troops, they lose the first big battle they fight there, which is called the Battle of Bull Run. And so then Carnegie helps to supervise the movement of retreating forces back across the river and out of Virginia. However, the rest of the war he would spend back in Pennsylvania. And when he was drafted, he receives this draft letter that, hey, you have to come fight in the Civil War, which is this incredibly bloody, deadly war. He did what virtually all wealthy men did, and he hired a substitute, a poor Irish immigrant, to go fight for him in his place. And he stops providing hands-on logistical and infrastructure support once the military engineers are trained up and can handle it themselves as well. So he does have this role in the Civil War that he provides logistical support, but that fades out over the course of the Civil War. So in 1864, Carnegie earns $47,000, which is 2025 equivalent of a few $1 million. Different inflation calculators will give you different answers, but all of them agrees it's somewhere between like a couple million to $8 million. All right. A lot of money he's earning by 1864. And remember, he's earning $35 a week as Tom Scott's secretary. So this has happened very, very quickly. The vast majority of this money does not come from his railroad salary. It comes from the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company and a bunch of other similar ventures, which give him a small stake in return for sweetheart deals with the Pennsylvania Railroad. His position with the railroad is an excellent place from which to make all these deals and make all these investments. Because basically everything has to move on rail, right? Iron, grain, people, messages, they all at this time have to use railroads. Another thing that has to travel by rail is oil. And Carnegie is an early investor in this new burgeoning industry. The oil industry is just starting for the first time. And specifically, he invests in a company called Columbia Oil. They actually have a terrible idea at first, which initially Carnegie is one of the people to think of this. And their idea is, hey, this oil is going to run out eventually. So let's just pump all of our oil into a vast artificial lake and hold on to it until this oil runs out. And then the price of oil is going to go through the roof, and then we can sell all this oil that we've held in this artificial lake at an elevated price. So it's actually, it's an interesting idea, right? It just turns out it's wrong on the facts. More oil fields would be discovered. It's 2025, we're still waiting for oil to run out. And also this artificial lake, it just leaks an unbelievable amount of oil into the ground. So it's an environmental disaster, and it's also a financial disaster to see all of your oil just seeping into the ground. Okay. But to their credit, they quickly realize that this scheme is not working out. And so they sell their oil at market prices. And this is at a time when just everyone is making money in the oil business, and they make a killing selling their oil with the Columbia Oil Company. This is actually the first thing that makes Carnegie like rich, is the oil business. Pretty quickly, this makes him a millionaire, which at the time, a millionaire is, like hundreds, a centimillionaire today, basically. So now with the oil business, he's making lots of money. So in 1865, with all these businesses booming, at the age of 29, Carnegie resigns from the Pennsylvania Railroad to focus on these other ventures of which he is an owner. Two of the big ones that he becomes involved with are first, iron production, and then second, a company that builds private bridges and then charges money to people who want to use them, especially the railroad companies, which again, is relying on his previous contacts to make money for this business. Carnegie has been working hard this whole time, but after 1865, he begins to take these long vacations to Europe quite frequently. He was obsessed with becoming, again, a gentleman, man of culture, and so he eventually buys a country estate in Scotland and a big art collection, and he spends a lot of time seeing the great sights of European civilization. And he would, at least partially, be an absentee capitalist for the rest of his life. He would avoid day-to-day management and manage his investments in part through other executives, through letter writing, and he was an extremely prolific and very good letter writer. He also tries a couple of things that don't work, steel-faced rail patents and a coal mining machine concept that doesn't quite work out. And so his income actually falls off slightly in the second half of the 1860s, but it very quickly recovers. The bridge company is also never a great business, but his iron production business is very, very successful. And he's selling himself iron to build these bridges, and he's still got great relationships with the Pennsylvania Railroad, who he's selling iron to. So he has no worries about people buying this iron, and he becomes very profitable from that business. He also becomes something of a financial middleman during this time. He's on very good terms with bankers in New York and London, and he's very close to the industrial scene. He knows everyone involved with iron, railroads, oil, you name it. So he helps to make deals between these two. He organizes bonds and stock offerings, and the whole time he's taking a small cut as he's arranging these relationships between industrialists and bankers. So basically, at this point, the Carnegie recipe for success is have your hands in everything. And he does. He's just got a little bit of interest. He's got a little bit of a stake in all these industries that are popping up in oil, in rail, in iron, in bridge building, in banks, in everything. And how is he able to do that? All right, what's the formula for getting your hands? That's much easier said than done. So what's the formula for getting your hands in everything? Number one, he has boundless energy. He's incredibly proactive. He's always sending messages, having meetings, all right? He's always there, okay? He's always there to take advantage of the opportunity because he is so active. Number two, he's incredibly well-informed. He knows whenever anything is happening. He keeps up on all the industry news. He keeps up on all of the non-industry news. He knows whenever something big is happening, and he knows when something else like a war, a policy change, an election, something like that might affect a business. And so he's able to take advantage of that information. Number three, he's an incredible networker. He's always hosting dinners and lunches, inviting people on vacations, sending notes and letters. He has a ton of stories and jokes on file that he loves to tell. He can be a little bit much. Sometimes people talk about this, like he talks a lot. He's got a lot to say. But all in all, people love to spend time with Andrew Carnegie because he's such a good networker and such a good conversationalist. And then number four, he takes on risks, okay? Carnegie always liked to portray himself as a good, solid businessman who never speculated and only prudently built solid businesses that made things. But the truth is, he had an enormous appetite for risk. Started new ventures, many of them did really well, many of them went bust. A lot of them were in pretty speculative areas where there was a lot of growth opportunity. So he took on a lot of risk. However, he made sure to always cap his risk by involving a really strong, solid partner who could backstop his losses. And frequently, that was the railroad. Okay, so here's what he wrote about it. He said, "My own career was thought by the elderly ones of Pittsburgh to have been rather more brilliant than substantial. I know of an experienced one who declared that, quote, if Andrew Carnegie's brains did not carry him through, his luck would. But I think nothing could be further from the truth than the estimate thus suggested. I am sure that any competent judge will be surprised to find how little I ever risked for myself or my partners. When I did big things, some large corporation like the Pennsylvania Railroad Company was behind me and the responsible party. My supply of Scotch caution never has been small, but I was apparently something of a daredevil now and then to the manufacturing fathers of Pittsburgh. They were old and I was young, which made all the difference. Okay, so he's basically saying like, this is just a bunch of old guys. I didn't actually take on that much risk, okay? But I think his strategy there is really smart, okay? So he took risks, but they were calculated risks with a backstop. He often involved the Pennsylvania Railroad, which brought a sense of gravitas and a financial depth there that meant that he wasn't going to be wiped out by some of these risky ventures. And in fact, his partnership with his brother was crucial because his brother, Tom, actually was very cautious, made sure all the dollars and cents added up. He was sort of the Roy Disney of the relationship. Their other partner, another Scottish immigrant boy who was their friend from youth, named Harry Phipps. And he was an extraordinary bookkeeper who never left his office. He was sort of a Rockefeller type figure, just unbelievable with the numbers and figures. Someone described him, quote, he was a cheese parer in every direction, making economies that would never occur to anyone else. If you've got Tom and Phipps as these great accountants, these great money managers who keep the costs down, are great operationally, what does that leave for Carnegie? What does he do? Here's what Nasaw says, quote, while Tom and Harry Phipps watched over the business, kept costs down and orders up, Carnegie supplied from a distance a businessman's sense of the directions in which the market was moving and how to capitalize on them. He also organized and directed the firm's early ventures into marketing, publicity, and advertising. The sales pamphlets and illustrated catalogs for Keystone were among the most polished in the industry, with beautifully designed wood engravings of bridges and detailed tabular summaries of the firm's past accomplishments. In the mid-1870s, after Linville invested what he called the Rivetless Post, Carnegie suggested the company place advertisements in every journal devoted to the mechanical engineering and architectural arts. Someone should read a paper upon it before the engineers. Your Franklin Institute should know about it. Indeed, I should, within 10 days, have so advertised it as to render it almost impossible that any man of intelligence should be ignorant of the fact that an important step has been taken by us in the use of wrought iron columns. Excuse me for dwelling upon the immense importance of publicity and of printer's ink. It is a department in which I believe you have permitted our most formidable rivals to distance you. Carnegie sketched for Linville the kind of short, well-displayed advertisement he had in mind and cautioned him to go to work and get some handsome lithographs. Add below a few words explanatory of the merits, and don't mix up this new post advertisement with anything else. It should stand alone as a specialty. So he has a great sense for the general trend of things. He's a great marketer. I love that phrase. Indeed, I should, within 10 days, have rendered it almost impossible that any man of intelligence should be ignorant of the fact that an important step has been taken by us. Okay? That is the benchmark of great marketing. Not is it possible for someone to hear about you, not have most people heard of you, but is it impossible to be ignorant of you? What a great litmus test. Well, we're going to leave it there. Carnegie is an extremely successful businessman with ownership of businesses in rail, ironworks, oil, express delivery, bridges and roads, and more. He is one of the wealthiest men in Pittsburgh, if not all of the United States. He has just resigned from the Pennsylvania Railroad to focus on all these businesses in which he has ownership stakes. But in 1872, something new would catch his eye. On a trip to Europe, he went to Sheffield, England, to tour a new type of steel plant developed by a man named Henry Bessemer. One biographer described it this way, quote, the change that came over the man in this, his 37th year, resembled the religious experience known as conversion. And like that experience, it came as the exaltation of a single moment. A mind that had lived in apparent darkness was illumined by a sudden flash of light. The dazzling brilliance of a Bessemer converter, in the twinkling of an eye, transformed Andrew Carnegie into a new man. So on part 2, we will see how steel, and specifically Bessemer steel, vaults Andrew Carnegie from a wealthy and successful man to the richest man on the planet. We will also see how he manages to give away that wealth and in so doing become one of the most influential men on the planet. But first, some takeaways. We've been talking about takeaways the entire time, but I'll throw in a few more that maybe kind of skipped over. Some quotes I found that didn't fit into the narrative. Okay, so first, This is a quote from Nasaw. Carnegie had all his life found a way to attach himself to older people who could be of use to him and he to them. All right, so if you are young and starting out, find the right mentors. Something that we talk about all the time on this show is hiring the absolute best talent. This is something that all the greats do, and all of them talk about it, right? But it can go in reverse as well. You should think about picking your first boss like you are hiring them, okay? Think about hiring your first boss. I think that is more important than finding the right position or industry or even right company. All of those do matter, of course, but even more important is finding the right boss. So think about that. If you're starting in a career, or even if you're halfway through your career, how do you think about hiring a boss and attaching yourself to them? Okay, number 2, another Nasaw quote. Later in life, when Carnegie was called upon to advise young men on how to succeed in business, he never suggested that unceasing hard work was a prerequisite for acquiring wealth. All right, so this is what I teased at the beginning. So what is the substitute, if not hard work? Now, we got to back up a second. There is no substitute for hard work. Let's acknowledge that, right? Because Carnegie, okay, he does go into semi-retirement at age 36, which is really remarkable. And he spends a lot of leisure time for the rest of his life. Having said that, let's acknowledge he worked very, very hard early in his career. There's something I've heard people talk about, which is liftoff speed, okay? Which is, if you think about a plane, you can get going really fast and then you reach cruising altitude and you don't have to work that hard for the rest of your career. However, if you never learn that, if you never reach that cruising altitude, if you never do that just like really back-breaking work early on, then you're never gonna get that cruising altitude, right? And so you have to limp along, you have to keep trying your whole career, right? So you do need that moment of really intense work. And Carnegie has it. He does work really, really hard early in his career. But okay, that's not what he relies on for most of his career. And it's not what he relies on to become the richest man in the world. So how does he do it? Well, he transitions from being a hard worker, making money by the sweat of his brow, pretty quickly to making money by having the right relationships and by doing the right work, okay? Obviously, you need to do great work first, and that means working hard to develop those relationships. But then who you know and how you know them matters even more than what you do and what you can do. So yes, work hard at the beginning, but you need to transition pretty quickly to thinking about relationships, okay? Relationships are really how Carnegie acquires so much wealth throughout his career. Number 3, he wrote in his journal, quote, "Whatever I engage in, I must push inordinately." Okay, I love that word, inordinately. I think about that quote. Whatever I engage in, I must push inordinately. Okay, inordinately means like too much. And you might think he meant that tongue in cheek, but no, like he meant inordinately. Everyone agreed. Whatever he was interested in, whether it was railroads or steel or world peace, he would push it inordinately. He would talk about it incessantly to the point that people were annoyed by it. Like people talk about this. Remember that earlier quote. He rendered it so that it was impossible for an intelligent man to be ignorant of a new development. If you want it to be impossible to not know about you or your company or the initiative that you're pushing, then that means repetition, repetition, repetition. If you want everyone to hear about it, then there's a spectrum of people who are paying attention to you. So if you think about like, if there's 10 people that are representing, everyone that you want to hear about it, you can think of a spectrum. The first person is maybe your friend, someone close to you, and so they are very tuned into what you're saying. And the 10th is a stranger who's not even really that interested, and you want them to hear about it too. Well, you have to repeat it so much that the 10th person hears it. That means the first person is going to hear it like 10 times, right? And Carnegie was like that. People would get sick of him talking about Bessemer Steel. People get sick of him talking about the railroads and talking about oil and his businesses, okay? So you just have to repeat yourself again and again and again. You have to push it inordinately, as he says. All right, we're going to leave it there. For those of you who are premium subscribers, first, I have some more endnotes, some more takeaways from his autobiography, and we're about halfway through. And then you're going to be able to go straight on to part 2. For the rest of you, part 2 will be coming out in a few days, probably early next week. So if you are a free listener and you would like to hear part 2 right now and hear all those endnotes, about 30 to 40 minutes of extra material between part 1 and part 2, then you can go to takeoverpod.supercast.com and sign up now. Or if you're listening in Apple Podcasts, you can subscribe in-app. If not, then that does it for this episode. Thank you for listening to How to Take Over the World. This episode was brought to you by Speechify. Carnegie would have loved Speechify because he loved books and he loved learning. Speechify turns anything into a podcast, including books, including emails, including PDFs, whatever you can think of. It can turn it into audio for you to listen to so that you can, read it while you are on a walk or doing dishes or at the gym or boarding a plane. I use Speechify all the time. I used it for the research for this episode, and I consulted my highlights and notes that I take in Speechify before putting together this episode. So please check them out. Go to speechify.com/Ben and use code Ben for 15% off Speechify Premium.